Okay, so our next speaker for today is going to be Madam Elizabeth Field, who is ICANN's Ombuds. So, Madam Elizabeth, please, if you can hear us.
I can hear you. Thank you so much.
Great.
It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm just delighted to join you all. Shall I share my slides, or what's the best way to make this work?
Oh, I think you can share a slide, please.
Okay, so great. Wonderful. I have access. That's wonderful.
Great.
Okay. So today, thank you for this opportunity to speak to you all about conflict resolution in ICANN. And what I'm talking about here is why conflict and disagreeing with dignity is the secret to a thriving multi-stakeholder environment. So I have, well, first of all, before I start, I have a secret to share with you all. Well, I have two secrets. So the first is about myself and about conflict, and I am absolutely passionate about conflict. So that sounds like it makes me a very bad dinner guest, and maybe somebody would not want to have at a party. But the truth is that I have worked for 20 years on sort of organizational and group conflict, and I have seen how powerful it is as a tool for change, as a means to help communities and groups and organizations build and perform. And so I really see that there is a transformative element to, under the right conditions, for conflict to support the aims and goals of groups. And so that's why I'm passionate about it. It's not because I'm a very strange person who likes a lot of bad things. I also know that conflict can be very damaging. It can be very destructive. And so I don't want to shy away from that. But in all of my work, from Chile to Thailand to Mali to Tunisia to the UK to Hungary, I have seen so many amazing things happen when groups have worked out how to navigate the differences and the strengths that they bring. So today, my second secret to share with you is that despite having 20 years experience, I am always learning on conflict. So I am here with you today. I may come with a technical background and expertise, but I am speaking to a virtual room full of experts. All of you are experts in this topic. These are human skills, human relationships. You are experts in your culture and your own kind of experiences. So I hope we all have something to learn, and we all have something to share. And I believe this very firmly. So I really hope that today I can give you something that's useful. Hopefully share with you a little bit about some straightforward information about what the office does, but I'd also really like to make this useful for you. So I'm inviting you all to help me make it useful. If you have questions, if you have something you'd like me to spend more time on, less time on, observation, something you'd like to share, I would really appreciate that. I only have about maybe 20 to 30 minutes of presentation planned, so there's plenty of time for all of us to chat, to pause, to ask questions, to answer questions. So I have three topics I'm going to cover with you today. So one is I'm going to introduce the office to you, the purpose of the office, the scope, the principles. Then the second chunk is the heart of this presentation with you, and I'm going to discuss conflict and complaint resolution in ICANN and how it works. I'll talk a little bit about some principles and a little bit about again, very straightforward, this is processes. And finally, I'm hoping to show you how the office can help you. I know there's a lot on the here, but I'm also wondering before I start if anyone has any particular if anyone has any particular questions or anything they'd like me to address, please feel free to either pop it in the chat or just say it out loud. I can't see the chat, just to let you know. But if anyone has anything they'd like me to address, I'd be very happy to do that.
Sure, please go ahead. We are with you.
Thank you. Super. Okay. So we'll start with the first section, which is introducing the ICANN Ombuds Office and what the purpose of the office is, the scope of the office, and the standards and principles. So it's very simple. The purpose of the ICANN Ombuds Office is to make sure that the ICANN community members are treated fairly. Okay, very straightforward, very simple. The role itself is established in the ICANN bylaws. And so it has a structure, it has a real sort of foundation to it that other similar roles I've had maybe haven't had as much structure and foundation. So I think this is very positive. So maybe a little bit about myself. So I am the ICANN Ombuds. I am Elizabeth Field. I've told you my secret about conflict. You know that I have a background of sort of 2 decades working in dispute resolution, ombuds work, conflict resolution. I've worked always in international nonprofit organizations. I've worked with the United Nations. I've worked with the UK Foreign and Development Office, so working, with a global population there, and working before that at a human rights organization, and always working on, volunteers, which is a really important aspect. That conflict is quite different in a volunteer environment to just a workplace environment. And I've worked with groups in every region in the world and many, many countries. So I recognize that this is why you won't hear from me, sort of do's and don'ts with conflict, because a do in one place can be a don't in another. So I talk a lot about principles and strategies instead. Also in the ICANN Ombuds Office, I have an adjunct ombuds, a woman called Linda Mainville. If you've ever been to ICANN meetings, you might have seen or met her. So we are the ICANN Ombuds Office, and our job is to make sure community members are treated fairly. So what we do, we make sure that community members are treated fairly through a range of services that we offer to community members. So this is everything from coaching, advice, guidance, inquiries. I've had since I started in ICANN in October of last year. So I have only been here a little over 6 months. And the majority of the 38 cases that I have handled have been this coaching, advice, guidance, inquiries off the record. And I'm really happy with this because I really want to encourage community members to make that contact with me in the office early on when something is, I need some information, or how can I handle this, or, I'd like to handle this, but maybe you can give me some advice on how I might speak to this person or help this person who has come to me with a problem. So that's really the majority of where the cases are, and I'm happy with that and want to encourage people to get in touch. And it is off the record, this early stages inquiries. I also offer conflict and dispute resolution. So this is everything from mediation to group work. And in other roles, I brought in a technique called restorative justice. And I don't know if people here are familiar with that, but it is, so I have a range of different methods that I bring. So it's not just mediation, but it's a very flexible, depending on what's appropriate to the situation, the group, where they are. I also like to bring in advice from a particular region, if I'm working in a particular region, or using people who work in a particular language to ensure that people have the method that is really best for them. The office also investigates complaints of unfairness or harassment. And I'll get to it a little bit later. I'll talk about the processes, but yeah, I'll investigate complaints of unfairness, unfair treatment, and harassment, which is a separate piece. I offer learning initiatives, so this can be something like a workshop or it can be something simpler and lighter on conflict and harassment. And the thing I'm most interested in, I think, or I think is the most important of all of this, is contributing to community health with taking all of this information about what individuals are telling me and putting it together and saying, what does this say about the whole ecosystem? Finally, I'm just going to cover the standards, and then I'll see if, because this is a lot of information, I'm sure there will be questions. So that's what the office does. This is how the office works. I won't go through all of these, but I want to call attention to a couple of standards and principles that are quite important. One is confidentiality. So contacts to the office are you are confidential. Your identity is protected, which means that the fact that you've spoken to me is confidential. The fact that what you've said is also confidential. Obviously, if there's themes I can extract where people are not going to be identified, that is something I work with. But I take that very, very seriously, because it really is important for people to feel that they can raise things without worrying about consequences down the line. So confidentiality is one thing I'd like to talk about. Independence is another. So the office is independent, and what that means is that the office is not aligned with any part of the organization. It is aligned with the whole. So I report to the board, which means that the board oversee me in the office, but it doesn't mean that I tell them what's happening in specific cases or I report on particular cases. It also doesn't mean that I am aligned with the agenda of the board. I am aligned with the entire ecosystem. So that's independence. And I think the other thing I'd like to mention is impartiality, which really I prefer the concept of omnipartiality, meaning I am on the side of everyone. So if I'm mediating between 2 or 3 or 4 people, I am there. My aim is to support everyone equally in that process. So that's there's a lot of information there about the introducing you to the office. So, and I'm sure some of it might be confusing, and I'm really happy to take some questions if there are any points that need clarifying.
Okay, I think we don't have any question at the moment.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Or do we have any question? Okay, I think we have one here.
Okay, great. Wonderful.
Okay. Sadiq. Okay, my question is about the harassment aspect and the confidentiality. So let me put it in an example. Let me give an example. Let's say there is somebody that maybe a lady that I'm friends with, but we've not, the rest of the group really don't know the type of friendship we have. Then anytime I see her, I give her compliment. But because it is something that is confidential between us, she just smile. But then somebody who doesn't really know about the other aspects of the confidentiality see it as me harassing her, then report. Won't that person who is also reporting in a way harassing us?
So your question is well, there's a couple of aspects. Would you like me to discuss how I would handle something like this, or are you curious about how confidentiality would apply to this, or the third element, which is, how you have felt that perhaps it's unfair that somebody is kind of observing or paying a close attention to your relationship, or
Okay, so I would like to know whether, in terms of the confidentiality, whether at a point, I will be forced to disclose the details of the friendship so that to avoid the further harassment or in terms of being reported as being harassing somebody when I'm not doing that. And the other aspect is that how do I tell the person to stop without having to go into details? And at what point should somebody also know that, let's say, maybe if something is going on between these two people and maybe he's even complimenting her and she's not saying anything in a way, so when do you need to get involved? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate that. It's a very layered and complex question, so I'll take a couple of those. So first, I understand the question around confidentiality. So from the Ombuds office, confidentiality applies to people who are in touch with the office. Obviously, for your question, you're talking, I guess, about the privacy that is, to do with your relationship with another person. So a couple of things that I would say is, that paying somebody compliments, if the person is not welcoming of them, or is not, you don't have if the person is uncomfortable by them, or not, doesn't appreciate them, or feels perhaps, that's one element. And it is up to this person to sort of raise and say, I'm uncomfortable. So this person you have a friendship with that has a particular, but if she is comfortable with that, if other people are observing that and are feeling uncomfortable, my first thing would be to encourage a conversation with you, about what they have noticed, and where you don't necessarily need to disclose, but to say, this woman and I have a, relationship, and, she pays me compliments, I pay her compliments, and, that's all that needs to be said. And no, I don't think you should be forced to disclose the nature of a relationship. And I think, it doesn't become a complaint that can be dealt with until there is a person who is saying, hang on, there's something harmful in this. I feel uncomfortable. I feel like maybe this is, crossing a line between work and my private life. So, in some this is again what I mean about, there's not a kind of, rule, a do and a don't necessarily. And if you don't know somebody, it's best to avoid compliments. If you have that relationship and have that trust, and that, there's something that you have built up, that's a different thing. In a work context, it can be very, a very gray area, with compliments, especially about, people's appearances or things like that. So it's a gray area. I think, yeah. So does that answer? I feel like there may be some further questions or something unanswered, but yeah, see if that's helped at all.
Okay, I think he has a follow-up. So I was asking, maybe the people who are observing too, at what point should they get involved? Because I'm paying the person a compliment, she's not uncomfortable, but should should it be that maybe can I just say, please mind your business, or is that not also or that's too like that's not diplomatic enough?
So thank you. So I think, there is a question, people who are bystanders and who are observing something, and it depends on, is the language inappropriate? Does it have obviously it's hard to say that's, a good or a bad thing without knowing really specific details. But if, language is maybe inappropriate, or if people are around hearing things in subject. So, I have handled cases where a bystander has brought, now it's not to do with necessarily just a compliment, but it's maybe, an example would be, it's a much younger woman and a very senior man, and the compliments are perhaps with some inappropriate tone and language in it, and she didn't feel comfortable speaking up, but people around were able to say, hang on, I'm not sure that this is appropriate. And, there's also a question too about when it becomes a complaint and when it becomes just a problem to be solved, right? And a lot of these issues are problems to be solved until, if they're not addressed, then it can become a complaint. But if it's like, I've paid a compliment, the compliment wasn't welcomed, I've said I've apologized and stopped, and that's all that needs to happen in this space. But does that help? At what point people getting involved is, again, it's a very gray area. People can, and I would encourage people, if they see things that are making them uncomfortable, to speak directly for themselves, because again, it's a very, there's not a absolute, this is absolutely correct behavior, this is absolutely incorrect behavior. It depends a lot on, context and individuals and things like that, which is of course hard, I know.
Okay, I think that helps. And there's a question online which says that how does the Ombuds office gets remunerated in terms of principles of independence? That is to ensure that the Ombuds does not advance the interest of the organization that pays its salaries, and to ensure the Ombuds is independent and not externally swayed.
This is an excellent, excellent question. And I think, yes, and it is. So the Ombuds office, I am paid by the organization, and that is, that is a fact, and that is the reality. And so there is often the, kind of everywhere I've worked, it's been the same thing, whether it's the UN, whether it's, Amnesty International, whether it's, the UK Foreign Office. It's so there's a couple of protections around independence that, even though my salary is paid, and one might say, does my loyalty lie to the person who pays my salary? But what I would say is there are a couple of protections that allow me the space to adhere to my professional ethics and standards. So first of all, it's very important. As an ombuds, I'm a member of the International Organization of Ombuds, and one of the, kind of core ethics, code of ethics for the organization is around independence. We commit to this, and all of the ombuds have the same constraints of, being paid, but also we recognize that to do our job well, we have to be independent. We have to keep our own counsel, and we have to see the broader picture, the different sides to things. And we have to be able to take a stand when it matters, and be able to, follow the process, look at the evidence, and be clear and thoughtful about the bigger picture. So I think, so one, there's my professional and personal code of ethics. Two is, I know that if I were to, it's not helping the organization if I don't have an honest and independent view, because what happens is you bury problems, and if you bury problems, they come up somewhere else. They're still going to be there. So if I'm not raising issues, or looking at the evidence and elevating the evidence, then we're going to be missing, the organization is going to be missing out on the opportunity to learn and to improve. So that's the second thing. The third thing I would say on this question is that the ICANN bylaws and my contract have protections in them that are very superior to anywhere I've worked before. So I have a contract provisions that protect me from, somebody going, I don't like her decision, let's get rid of her. I have the independence is, in the bylaws. That is, it's both a responsibility of the office and something that is protected. Does that help?
Yes, I think that helps. Thank you so much. So another one. So there is a case where there are cultural differences, and in a case where something is offensive to somebody in European countries, might not be offensive to someone in Africa. So how do you differentiate, or how do you resolve such issues?
So, and that is a question that goes on that is a kind of an omnipresent issue in these environments where we have lots of people, and it's cultural differences, but it's also individual differences. People communicate in different ways, they have different habits, they have different expectations. So there's a couple of things with that. So first of all, again, we talk about there's the complaint and then there's the problem to be solved. If we're looking at there's a problem to be solved, that is much softer and broader. And this is about providing feedback about the impact. So if something is offensive to an individual in one culture, providing feedback, giving the benefit of the doubt. So it's not that you meant to offend me. I'm taking the opportunity now to let you know that what you said or did, or that gesture that you made, it's upset me a lot. And, I would like for you to understand the impact on me and to stop. So there's solve the problem, give feedback, give the opportunity for someone to understand and correct what has happened. And so it's sort of, it's important, I think, to take a nuanced approach and to be thoughtful and careful with these issues. It is also important to recognize that its impact, when we look at something, it's not just, well, I was intending to make a joke. I don't understand why he got so offended. It was just a funny joke and he's taken it the wrong way. It's the impact on him. And again, if I didn't mean to do that, I still did it, and I still need to take responsibility and correct that. All these things can happen without it getting very serious. So I think, I look at the how do we solve the problem? How do we correct? How do we help explain what we need? And again, differences vary from culture to culture. They vary from individuals. They vary with experience. There's a whole range of things that may drive that space of gray area. And what I would say is, in all the years of doing this work, it is very, very, very rare for, there's these extreme cases of sort of bullying or harassment. It's very rare that these things, not very rare, but it's rare enough that these come up. It's much more the sort of gray area scenarios where it's harder to navigate. Does that help your question?
Yes, we have another question here. Thank you so much.
All right, so thank you very much. So in ensuring that all community members are treated fairly, I'm a community member and I have a complaint, but I want to remain anonymous. Is that okay? I submit a complaint and I want to remain anonymous.
It depends. It depends a lot. So somebody can bring something. So again, obviously it's hard to answer without knowing specifics. But what I would say is, if anonymity is important to somebody, I would try to make that, to honor that and make that request. So sometimes it's entirely possible. So for example, somebody might bring something and say, I've observed, here you go, here's a recording to a meeting I attended. Here is the, what happened in that meeting that I think was unfair. I don't want to be known as the person who raised this, but I'd like for you to look at that. That's quite straightforward and easy. You don't need to have your name attached to that. It can be anonymous. I would look at it, and give, but if it's a complaint, obviously when you have a closed group, there would be, I would work through with somebody who brings that and says, I need anonymity. And we work through, what are the risks if you're found out, we would go through all of that. So if people request it, I would try to honor it. Some complaints cannot be progressed anonymously. And that would be, for example, if somebody's brought to me something and said, well, this person is bullying me and I want you to investigate them, I can't, I'm very constrained. Again, unless something has happened, in a public domain or forum, or where I can look at evidence that's not going to lead back to somebody, that's one thing. But it is, and because it's quite important, if we look at this point around fair treatment too, it's very important to ensure that both those raising an issue and both those who are, at the other end of that complaint are treated fairly. And so, if a complaint can be progressed, if it's against an individual, it's quite hard to do that keeping someone anonymous, but it's not to say it's impossible. And what I would always invite is for people to contact me, have the off the record conversation about what the options are. There's no notes kept, there's no record kept. They discuss, these are the things. If they would like to, try to raise something, then we would start that process, from over again, like, more on the record, but you can have that off the record conversation with no obligation. But it is important too, when people are on the receiving end of a complaint, that they have, information about what it is they're being accused of, what the evidence against them is. They have the opportunity to respond to that, to say, to explain what happened. They need information about the process. They need to participate. So, we have to ensure that it's a fair and just process for everyone. Does that help with anonymity?
Great, great, very clear. Thank you so much. So another question as well.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is one in two folds. One is a follow-up to the question you earlier addressed, talking about considering backgrounds, reporting harassment. What is meant to be an harassment to someone in a region differently from another region? I would want your opinion in terms of how do we manage it, most especially during training. Like for us here, we are fellows in training, and we have the same content worldwide. So during training, we were told, oh, these and these and these and that constitute harassment, whereas culturally, it's not. So how do we manage that during training? Take, for instance, as an African girl, it's off for me to just make my hair and I get to the office and nobody says anything. I mean, it's completely off. And if you say, okay, that will be constituting an harassment if a guy compliments me for just making my hair, whether or not we have anything in common. So during training, how do we manage? How do we balance that? That, oh, meeting a guy for the first time and hugging him would not be constituted an harassment in Africa if it will be seen as an harassment anywhere in the world. That's one question. Then my second question will be, now as a victim of harassment, I'm to report to the Ombudsman. So what if the harasser happened to be from the office of the Ombudsman or the Ombudsman himself? So who do I make a report to?
Okay, so there's two parts to your question. So one is so you were asking about the training and, if the examples given in the training, which are given as in, your region, the Africa region, they would not be considered harassment or considered harassment. And it was, so there's this question of these examples, and then there's this question of, well, what happens if it's the ombuds doing the harassing? So I'll start with the question around examples and training. And first thing I would say is, if there are examples that you have encountered in the training is to talk about them, kind of bring them up specifically. You can give feedback and say, here is what doesn't work. This is why it doesn't work. This is an example, and we can look at that together. What I would say is that also is, we come into this kind of intercultural, and I use the word inter, not multi, because I'm talking about we blend as we come together. So in an intercultural environment, there is a lot of adaptation that happens, and it's important, I think, to recognize that the group agree collectively on a set of norms that are this is what we're comfortable with, this is what we're less comfortable with. As I said before, context is everything. And context helps to determine if something is, not on, if something is, acceptable or not. And so the group set the norms, and all of us, kind of have to adapt our personal and our cultural somewhat to those norms, right? And so some things we have to, do, some things we have to stop doing. And it's just, it's about sort of navigating these differences collectively as a group together. So that's one thing I would say about, and so, give feedback if you've got examples, share them so that we can make sense of the things. And it may be that there are examples, and often I find examples are very hard because the example is nothing without the context, right? So to say, you look very pretty today, in one situation, absolutely fine. In another context, absolutely not fine. So what might make that not fine is, the person has said, please don't comment on my appearance. There might be power differentials. This might be a series of comments. This might be the way the person, there's a whole range of things that could make that fine, a whole range of things that could make that not fine. So, examples and context, it's hard without the context to sort of weigh in on the examples. So it is, so it's about adaptation, recognizing that as a collective norms are set, and, every environment that I've worked in has had, all sorts of things that have, worked in one area, not worked in another, regional differences, what works. And I, have worked with groups, intercultural groups, where you have one style of communication in Thailand with another style of communication in Argentina. And for the person in Thailand, the person in Argentina is a bully because that's how they speak. And for the person in, you have a whole range of things that need to be adapted to. And again, that's why I think feedback is so important, because we're not always going to get it right. We're going to miss things. It's not about, trying to catch people out making mistakes it's really about trying to work together in a way that we're all safe and comfortable. Okay. The second part of your question was about somebody is a victim of harassment, and it's the ombuds, that would be me or my adjunct, who has done the harassment. And there are options. I think if you have a complaint that you'd like to make, I report into the boards. The board would be the first to say, look, she stopped me in the hall, and she was using very inappropriate language with me and making this, that, and the other. So that could be the first step. I mean, obviously, I would not investigate myself. I believe very, very firmly in the importance of good process and ensuring that, that there is the appearance of, not just the appearance, but the actuality. So it needs to be done. If there was a complaint that needed to be handled, that would need to be done independently of the office. It would need to be looked at. And, I am subject to the same standards that everyone else is subject to. Does that help your question, or do you have follow-up questions?
So, thank you so much for the insights. I think we have one last question here.
Okay, so Elizabeth, thanks for your presentation. I heard, or let's say I keep hearing adaptation. So my question is, what are we supposed to adapt to? Is it the policy, or adapt to cultural orientation that we don't see a problem with, we are comfortable with? What are we supposed to adapt to? Yeah.
That's an excellent question. And I'm very glad that you asked it, because I want to have the opportunity to be clear that it's not that adaptation. So there is the first step to that adaptation point, which is a collective set the norms, right? So it's not just about, well, in North America, where I come from, this is how we give feedback. And if you don't give feedback like this is the wrong way of going about it. It is also about saying, well, how do we want to do this as a group? How do we want to ensure that everybody from, India to Chile to Canada feels safe in this environment? How do we do that? And so that's the first step. The first step is to collectively come together and agree. So ICANN has these expected standards of behavior. They have the community anti-harassment policy. These are set by the community. These are agreed by the community. There's opportunities for the community to input and shape on this. So that's the first step. The second is the adaptation that we all make when we come into an environment like this is, we have to try and leave elements behind and pick up elements that are expected. Yes, that sometimes means that things that, I would expect to be able to say in one context, I might have to, monitor in this context. Or, in the example I gave, which is from a case I had years ago, where it was a man from Argentina working with a group, and the person from Thailand had, in Argentina, it's perfectly, and in his culture, in his context, it's perfectly okay to raise your voice, to speak loudly, to be very, to gesture a lot, to when you're making a point, to say, I don't agree with that. But the man from Thailand in the group, he was shocked and offended. He felt everyone seeing this. So it's not about sort of saying, he's blamed, he's a bad guy, he's a bully, we're going to go. And it's about helping him and everyone adapt. So there's a little bit, everyone's got to do a little bit of work together. Does that help? Because I think it's a really good question, and I don't think there's an easy answer to it.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that helps. So maybe we can go ahead.
Okay, great. And I'm so grateful and appreciative for the questions and the engagement. This is very important to me. So thank you so much. And I'm keeping an eye on the time. So I'll move really quickly now to the scope of the office. So what the office can and can't do. And this is, this is quite straightforward in the bylaws. I think, I'm here to support the community. So in scope is something raised by the community. If it's raised by a staff member, it's not in scope. I can deal with complaints about unfairness, a decision, action, inaction by either ICANN org or community group, and decision, action, or inaction by the board that's inconsistent with the bylaws. So that's the unfairness element. I handle harassment complaints under the community anti-harassment policy, conflict resolution, question, advice about conflict. And as I said, my approach is really, it's problem to be solved before it becomes a complaint. And also providing workshops and webinars for your community group. Out of scope are quite specific things like I can't, internal administrative matters. So that's how the organization is structured, how they're, funded, how they're resourced, how decisions. I can't say whether the decision is a good decision or a bad decision or the right decision. I can look at the process to reach that. So that's scope of the office. And now I'll move really quickly. I'll talk a little bit about conflict resolution in ICANN. And I had 4 principles to share with you, but I won't go over these today. I will send the pack to you and you can have a look at them afterwards, because I'd like to I see there's a lot of interest in some of the areas. So I want to save time for questions on the process. So I have 3 levels I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about the Ombuds process, and I'll talk about fairness because I think that would be interesting as well. So 4 principles, won't talk about this exactly today, except maybe just to pause on 2 points really quickly here, which is the difference is our strength. And as part of that, we need to be anticipating and inviting that challenge, that disagreement, that different point of view, and that understanding sort of how how is another point of view working? How does another, what's another angle on this? And conflict, as I said at the very beginning, it really has a purpose and a function in teams and groups. And there's a lot of research, and I've worked with this over the years. It shows how, you get more creativity, you get better ideas, you get stronger ideas, you get more sustainable solutions. And so I really want to, help people to see that the conflict is a feature, not a bug necessarily, of this multi-stakeholder environment. It's just how we deal with it. And so the next point I wanted to just mention, I won't go into great detail here, is the concept of dignity, something that's really important to me and I've done a lot of work with over the years. And that helps the how we disagree, and it helps us to disagree well, treating each other with dignity, treating each other like we matter, like our points of view matter, even if we disagree with them, trying to see, to recognize, to understand, being accountable when we've made a mistake, apologizing, correcting, giving people the benefit of the doubt, a whole range of things. And that's what, when we talk about prevention, which I'll go to here, we don't talk about preventing conflict exactly. We talk about preventing escalation. Okay. So here, there's sort of the three levels are really about, the biggest level is prevention. And I heard the gentleman who was speaking when I joined the call was talking about awareness and, the importance of awareness and cybersecurity. And it's a bit the same thing with conflict. The prevention element, that's where the most of our time and effort is really on the awareness, the education, the skills, the leadership, the, how we work as a team, how do we understand our roles? What's our relationships like? Are we communicating? So the first is really around prevention, and we have the ICANN expected standards of behavior, which cover things like respect and listening and consensus and transparency and acting in good faith and treating people equally. And that, again, is this collective norm that the community has agreed on that helps prevent the very important conflict and disagreement from escalating. Sometimes it does. Sometimes we have to respond to the conflict. And with that, we have a range of things. There's mediation. There's, I can provide coaching, dialogue process, shuttle negotiation, and sometimes a complaint can be the way to resolve something. But I would like to say that's usually at the kind of smaller end of the resolution process. And here with the response, we have the ICANN community anti-harassment policy, again, set by the community, agreed by the community. And then at the top, we have something which I think is really important, which is repair. And after something has happened, somebody maybe has, made a comment that was perfectly fine in my culture, but in this person's culture, they're offended by it. It is, how do I fix that? How do I restore that? How do I give an apology? How do I take responsibility, but also explain, where I'm coming from? And, so that repair piece is quite important. I'm going to go next, the Ombuds processes, and then I'll pause and see if there are questions on these. And so the Ombuds office has kind of 4 lanes of process. And the first is, as I've mentioned, is this inquiry, this off the record, asking for advice, guidance, coaching, off the record. The individual might come and ask for something, off they go to see if they can deal with it or not. I never know unless they come back and tell me. But that is really, so that's the majority. That's where I really encourage people. There's also a lane of Ombuds assisted, which can be Ombuds is looking into it. Again, off the record, not formal. It might be somebody saying this, in our group, the elections went like this. I think they were a little bit not right. Can you tell me what the standard is, what they should be? Can you, have a look at the regulations? Or can you give feedback to somebody? I've observed something. Can you help? Again, not formal. There's no outcome to this unless the, individual leads the outcome themselves. There's conflict and dispute resolution. So this is where the Ombud, and again, in both of those roles. It's very informal. Conflict and dispute resolution, this is where the Ombuds facilitates. And again, the Ombuds at this role in this process, so if I'm mediating, my job is not to determine who is right and wrong. It is not to gather evidence. It is not to have an opinion, but it is to provide a space for people to communicate and problem solve together. And then there's the complaint lane, and that has two lanes down from it. One is, an unfairness, being treated unfairly, and the other is harassment as well. So those are two separate lanes. I want to just very quickly touch on unfairness and fairness, and here, and then I'll pause and see, because again, I think a lot of information given very quickly. I'm sure there will be questions, or hope there will be anyway. So the first is, this is a model I use for fairness. Fairness is perceptual. Our perception about what's fair or not may differ from somebody else's, but there is a standard sort of thinking process that people go through to determine whether they feel fairly treated or not, and it has three layers to it. The first is, how fair was the outcome? So, how fair was the decision? So let's say I've lost my job. How fair was that decision? Well, not fair, because it's not fair for people to lose their jobs. But how fair was the process used to determine that outcome? Well, the organization had financial issues. They followed their process. They gave me notice. They explained, what was happening. They provided support. Process was pretty fair. How was I treated? By those determining the outcome, they treated me with dignity, with respect. They recognized my concerns. They, anticipated the impact on me. I was treated pretty fairly. Often there's nothing you can do necessarily about what the outcome is, but the other two pieces are, something you have a lot of control over. And when I'm evaluating for unfairness, I do not look at the decision. So if somebody has made a decision, if ICANN org has made a decision, I don't have technical expertise. I am not in a position to say whether that was the right decision or the wrong decision. But if I'm determining whether that person was treated unfairly or not, it's looking at, well, was the process used? Did they follow the process? Was it followed in the same, applied equally to everybody who should have been? Did they say, they were supposed to answer the complaint in 5 days and they answered it in 50 days? What's the, what should have happened according to what's set in the standards and the rules and the policy, and what did happen? And then how fairly were you treated? Were you given response? Were you treated with, kind of dignity and respect, expected standards of behavior, etc.? So a lot of information, very short space of time. And we've got 4 minutes left. And before I just show you how you can get in touch, I want to see if there are questions about that, because I'm sure I gave up, confusing information, and I'd like to help clarify.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have one question here.
Okay, so I would like to find out, in the conflict resolution process, does it give the chance for a party to reappeal an outcome?
So, in a conflict resolution process, in the conflict, I don't make a decision. So there is no need for an appeal, because in a conflict, so let's say I am mediating in a group where, one half of the group are saying the other half are not working well, and they're maybe doing the wrong things in the group, and they're not working well. They're blaming each other for problems. I'm not going to come in and say, you're right and you're wrong, if I'm doing a conflict resolution process. If I'm doing a conflict resolution process, I'm going to work with them to identify the problem, look at ways to solve it, communicate. They then own that outcome. So they then are responsible if they say, okay, we agree that from now on, we're going to work in this way. They're responsible for maintaining that. And then if that breaks down, then you look at, what are your options? Maybe try again. My one thing I would say is, conflict is very dynamic. It changes. It's not a linear path, straight path forward when you're resolving. It can, go up and down and back and forth. So that's what I would say about conflict resolution. And a complaint, if I handle a complaint and somebody doesn't agree with what I have, then it would go, then I would say, let's say I've had a finding and there is a consequence. So for example, there's a consequence and the person says, well, I don't agree with this consequence. It then goes to the board, but there's not, an appeal as such on something that doesn't have a consequence. Does that help? Or do you have follow-up questions?
No, I think that helps. So there is a hand online. Fanny, if you can hear us, unmute and speak.
Thank you so much for the presentation. My question is, when it comes to implementation of the decision that you made, where there was a complaint that was recorded and then you did the investigations, so how do you ensure that the decision you make is implemented by the person whom the decision has been made against? So how do you ensure the implementation of your decision?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. So again, that's a great question. Generally, that would, if there is a decision taken and there's a consequence, that would have a sort of process for monitoring it. And if there is non-compliance with that, then again, that would go to the board. But it would be, there is a kind of, if there is something, then, then it's, here's how we're going to monitor this. Here's how we're going to keep an eye on this. If somebody is not supposed to participate and, maybe has some restrictions on participation, then we would look at, how do we enforce that? But yeah, does that help?
Yes, it does. And lastly, my last question, just a follow-up. So for instance, you make a decision and a person is not satisfied. Do they have a place to appeal that decision that you've made?
So let's say someone's brought a complaint and then I said, if I've understood it, and I've said, no, I don't think there's any harassment here or there's any unfairness here. And you say, well, I don't agree with this. Is that the question?
Yes, that's the question. And also on the flip side, where you've made a decision that perhaps incriminates the person who harassed the other, can they appeal your decision and where do they go?
So if somebody, for example, if I have basically done an investigation and I have concluded on the basis of the evidence that I have seen that harassment has happened and the policy's been violated and the best action, as a consequence, there needs to be A, B, and C. And again, I bring a restorative lens to this. So it is often about what needs to happen to fix the problem. What is that person, if somebody has been harassed, what do they need to recover? And it often isn't a punitive thing. It's often something very different. And this has been my experience in 20 years. So the question of appeal would come in is if somebody, and that can go to the board, but that's if somebody has a consequence set against them that they don't agree with. So if, as I said, there is a restriction on participation, on a role, on something like that, then that is something, then they can say, I don't agree with this. And then there can be a negotiation around that, or it goes to the board, if somebody's not satisfied, if I have not removed the right, if I, for example, not found in favor of an unfairness complaint and they're not satisfied, I think that is really about performance feedback to the office, and there are opportunities for that, but there isn't an appeal as such because these aren't, it's not there wouldn't be an appeal for if I haven't, taken away something that somebody has a right to. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I see that we're 3 minutes over and I know that there is snack time. So I don't want to but I'm very happy to stick around and answer questions for those who have more questions, and maybe just to show you the final, the slide deck will be available for those who want to, look at some of the things I didn't cover. Just to say, to contact the office, there is this opportunity to have that off the record discovery call, to just chat things through, ask questions like the ones you've been asking me today. No record kept, no nothing, it never happened, but it's a great opportunity to get more information and talk about things. So this is all my contact details, but also, as I said, if there are other questions, I'm very happy to stick around for people who want to hear more, and want to ask other questions.
Thank you so much for your time, Elizabeth. I think we are much grateful, and let's take one last question.
Thank you very much, Madam Elizabeth, for the wonderful presentation. My question is, how effective does ICANN's system for resolving community disputes work for people in Africa, considering the region's limited technical capacity and underrepresentation in the global internet governance structure, and language barriers, since majority of ICANN's work happens in English, and then most of African countries, we speak different languages like French and then Arabic and other local dialects, and then engaging in Africa, the ICANN works, we face challenges due to this language barrier. So how is it possible for ICANN to resolve those disputes? Thank you very much.
Absolutely fantastic question. And so the first thing is, I think that's for you to help me answer, in the sense of how effective is the ICANN system at resolving disputes and meeting the needs of the community in Africa. And if the answer is not very, your your experience is, no, it doesn't really serve my needs terribly well, then what I'd like to say is, I would love to invite you to help me ensure that it does meet your needs. So with language, I recognize language. I speak French. My adjunct speaks French. I am working on bringing in resources, including Arabic speaking resources, so that I can tap particular regional resources as they are needed for particular issues. So that's a sort of slightly longer term plan. Over the next year, I would hope to bring in a couple of ad hoc resources that can help with some of these things. But there are bigger questions here around, as you said, what you described as the underrepresentation and the language barriers, but there's also many other things, and how to resolve disputes when there are these structural issues is a great question. And I'd really like to, I can say, yes, I can, meet the sort of needs, hopefully, and adapt and provide what would, suit. And generally when people come and I do a conflict assessment, when people say, I have this dispute, I have this issue, I do a conflict assessment. What are the needs? What are people looking for? Do they need something in a particular language? They would feel more comfortable working with somebody who's familiar with the region. That happens as part of the assessment. And I can say, I might not be able to help you, but let me find somebody who can help you, who would, be able to work with you. So, yeah, I think really I don't have a good answer for that, because I don't think, sitting in Geneva doesn't give me a good perspective on being able to say, oh, we can meet the needs of people in Africa without, I need to hear from you. So I would really, really love to have your feedback and input on that. I would be really grateful.
Okay, thank you so much. I keep saying one last question, but this is the last one.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. Mine was, I wanted to ask if there had been instances where these are conflicts, and we deal with human beings differently in different locations. So with your background, I know you've worked for about 20 years in different countries. Had there been instances where you've handled some conflict resolution to a point where you don't have consensus, you've not resolved them? And in that instances, what has been the impact on ICANN so far, where people even decide to even leave the organization? How are you able to manage those reputational damages and all of that?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Wow. So I've only been in ICANN for a short time, so I can't answer from the ICANN perspective, but I can answer this as best as I can, because I think this is a really big question, which is, can you get to a point where you can't resolve it? And of course the answer is yes. You can get to a point where, what I often say to people is, sometimes you're not going to resolve this. The best you're going to get is, to find a way to accommodate it. Oftentimes, not oftentimes, but sometimes things come to me and they've been going on for so long that, really the best you're going to do is to limit damage, maybe repair some of the damage, but you're not going to get people restore the relationships. But sometimes you can. I have seen some of the most extraordinary things happen, but to transform something, and anything is, I have not seen something yet that can't be transformed when people are willing to put in the work and the time. Now, that's not always practical. It's not always something people want to do. That doesn't always feel strategic. So it doesn't always happen, but there's nothing that I've seen that people haven't been able to repair and to find a way through it. So that's the first thing I would say, is that, everything has an opportunity for repair, transformation, and learning within it. Whether that's going to happen or not is another question. And so, sometimes it is about, there is, my experience is, and that's why I really advocate for a restorative rather than a punitive approach, because the restorative approach really focuses on learning. It focuses on, repairing harm, recognizing, taking responsibility. It's not about turning people into villains, making people bad guys, good guys. It's really about, as a community, acknowledging that we have a problem and taking, steps to solve it. And so when that happens, people can decide, look, this isn't for me. I would like to leave. But if they have been, there's been a kind of justice process, a process of learning and sharing and sort of, I wouldn't say healing, that's maybe a bit strong, but, sometimes some of these processes can help people leave in a better way than, just a kind of, bang and you're out. So, the process to me is very important, because I can see that it can generate learning, even if it doesn't fix the problem. So does that help?
Yes, please. I think that helps. Thank you so much. What an enlightening session. We would like to thank you so much for making up time to engage us, and we are much grateful for that as well. So as you shared your contact details, we would always reach out for follow-up questions and more engagement. Please, let's give her a hand of applause.
And thank you. I want to say a really sincere thank you. This has been such a great session for me. I'm absolutely delighted and honored to have such engagement and the questions and lots to think about. And please, I would love to hear from you. So please do get in touch if, even if it's just to share a reflection, a thoughts and feedback, an idea, would really appreciate that. So have a wonderful day, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your magnificent program.